Well, is there anything, David, that you'd like to say?
Um, yeah, I mean, look, just obviously for Stephen, David, Ashish, Chris, and anyone that does join or see this on video afterwards. I'm really pleased that we were able to get this session with Celine. Celine, obviously, you may recall, I first met Celine at an offsite meeting I was at in, I think it was October of last year.
Mm.
And she ran a session for the group I was with, and I thought it was really, really excellent. And if you remember, that was focused on the welculator and things that we can do to try and kind of manage our overall wellness. And it's something that I think everybody knows is important, but doesn't necessarily prioritize our own wellness. So I think it's great that Celine's been able to make herself available for us for a few things. She's run a few sessions for us. The first one on gut health. There was one just before Christmas, which was I think sort of positive psychology, but around the champagne making process.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and
and
effervescence and staying
yeah, yeah,
sparkling.
yeah, 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 and obviously has made her wellness clubhouse, wellbeing clubhouse, sorry, available to us as well. There's a lot of great resources in there. So um, this one obviously was rescheduled. That is my problem. So apologies for that. I'm pleased we are able to get it in again today. And this one is, I keep on wanting to call it tune out to tune in. I think
Yes.
it is. I'm never sure it's tune out, tune in, or tune in and tune out, but tune out to tune in. Um, and I really like the idea of this one because I think, as we go further into COVID and home working and all of that stuff, it is important to make as much a delineation as we possibly can between work and non-work. And that's really difficult, I think, when we're in this home working environment. So I know that Celine's got a lot of stuff and tips and tricks she's going to talk us through there. So I'm looking forward to the session. And yeah, thank you. And yeah, really over to you, Celine.
Yeah, yeah, great. It's exactly that. So tune out to tune in or tune in to tune out. It's about taking the context that we find ourselves in. And I don't know how you're feeling, but I'm having a lot of people, and even myself, there's this lingering fatigue. It feels like we should be at the end of the year, but we're really only halfway. And that's definitely a result of the energy drain that we experience when we're under a lot of stress and uncertainty. So humans, we aren't wired to be able to thrive with uncertainty. And there's so much we can't change. There's a lot going on from sport to politics to all kinds of things. But the one thing we can often have an influence over, if not necessarily completely change, is the way we approach our well being. So today specifically is about looking at the challenges of working from home, which is not really working from home, right? I don't know if it feels a bit like living at work for some of you. And for the foreseeable future, that's not going to change just yet. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today can be applied even when you are commuting and going back to the office at some point, because we know how important strategic recovery and rest is to be able to allow us to tune out, which is to be able to sleep and rest and to disconnect from work, but then to be able to tune in with our full energy and tap into flow and stay energized. So I recognize David and Stephen and Ashish. I think you were at the first session, right?
Yeah, yeah, I was part of the first session, so then
Yeah, great.
enjoyed
Okay.
it.
Yeah, I think I was there for a bit.
Okay. Because I'm just going to recap very quickly, though, the framework, the Wellculator. So if anybody watches this, they know that that is an important foundation because it's hard to manage our emotions and our mental well-being if we're not well hydrated or well rested. Those are very basic things. And often when we get stressed and busy, it's those basic things that go out the proverbial window, so to speak. So the context for today, thank you, David, is around acknowledging that if this was easy, we would all be healthier and happier. It isn't easy. We're going through very difficult times. I thought this quote was quite appropriate. In the depth of winter, I finally learned that there was in me an invincible summer. So at the moment, it may feel like we're having an invincible summer. And we also know that the seasons will change, right? In a month or two, or already I've noticed that the sunset is happening a bit earlier, so the days will continue to get shorter, the nights longer, it will get cooler, and we'll find ourselves in winter, and then again we'll have another season change and move into spring, and then move into another summer. So no matter where we may be, not just seasonally, but also in terms of emotional and mental and physical well-being, it's important to know that things will change. So when we're feeling really maybe stuck, or that we know that we're really drained and tired, to know that it's okay to not be okay. And that these different components of our well-being, we've got our physical well-being, which relates to the body and how we move and how we eat and how we fuel ourselves, and our health numbers like cholesterol and blood pressure. And then we've got our emotional well-being, our mental well-being, and then we have a sense of spiritual well-being or meaning. And all of these are important, and they fluctuate. I mean, today, if I had to ask you, or I would like to ask you to reflect, which of those 4 dimensions, so physical, emotional, mental, and meaning, do you feel strongest in if you were to choose one? Perhaps just reflect on that. And I bet that it might be different. It may be, for some of us, it might be emotional. For some, it may be physical. It might be meaning. And having skills to help us in all 4 of those dimensions is really helpful. And one of the things, or the top skills that I teach, is that we need to check in with ourselves. And I know this sounds obvious, but this common knowledge isn't common practice. Like, when was the last time that you asked yourself, how am I? How am I in this moment? So you have an opportunity to ask yourself now, how am I? And you could ask yourself, how am I physically? So how is my energy levels? How's my appetite? How am I feeling in terms of, do I need to move because I've been sitting for the last 3 hours? Or you could check in with your heart. How am I feeling in my heart? Like, is there something on my chest, so to speak? Am I suppressing a feeling? Because what we suppress, the body will express in some way. And how am I in my mind? Am I struggling to focus and concentrate? Do I need to maybe write down a checklist or make a call and get something out of the way so that I can really focus and be present? And then how am I in terms of my meaning or spirit or contribution or feeling as if I belong or part of something bigger? Because it's only with conscious awareness that we then can make conscious choice to potentially change anything about ourselves. We can come across this by luck, but actually I find when we have awareness of how we're feeling, we can then say, okay, I'm feeling tired and sluggish, and I'd like to feel more energized and focused. And simply by asking the question, by being curious, you start potentially opening up to solutions that you may not have thought about. And when it comes to looking after the body, in the session that we did, I think it was in October or November last year, I took you through the Wellculator, which takes a look at 10 areas that are incredibly fundamental to sustaining a good, solid physical foundation and good habits around our physical well-being. So as a really quick recap, in fact, I'm not even going to go through all the points. I'm just going to show you the 10 points. The first 4 are about hydration and how we eat. And the most important one there is number 2, was are you eating like an artist? So if you're eating a lot of colorful foods, and remember, colorful foods were not like Skittles and M&Ms and wine gums, but vegetables and salads and fruits. The more we eat of those, generally, the better, because they give us low calorie, high nutrient profile, and very good for our immunity because of the impact on gut health. And when we speak about a global pandemic, we need to also be speaking about our own internal immunity, and that starts with how healthy and balanced the microbiome is in your gut. And if you're interested in exploring that deeper, like David mentioned, I've done some presentations and a masterclass on gut health, and I'd be very happy to share the recording with you, or some resources that you could look into. And then number 5 is around checking if all these changes to your diet and what you're eating and what you're doing is actually working. So a personal example, I was taking vitamin D for 2 years, and then I checked my vitamin D levels and they were still really clinically low. So I changed the format of the vitamin D supplement, and then they went up. So if you're taking any supplements, I really recommend that you measure that your body's actually absorbing them. Because for reasons that I won't go into today, we have genetic predispositions to different absorption rates, different absorption formats. And if your gut health isn't good, for instance, you may not get all the nutrients that you need. So don't just spend money and let it and potentially waste it. Make sure that you can check that. So there's companies that you can order online test kits from. like Thriver or Fourth for Life, and they make it super easy for you to check these things at home. And then today we're going to go specifically into point 6 and 7. So how do we approach the concept of rest so that we can tune in and tune out? And how does mindfulness tie into that? And then we also looked at how important it is to move during your workday, to do the right kind of physical activity for you. That also includes stretching. Now with all the hours that we're spending behind our screens, it's so important to be aware of opening up your hip flexors and working on the lower back so that you don't have strain and headaches. And one of the speakers I'm actually going to bring in for September, as everybody comes back to the office, is like an ergonomic specialist. And there's some basic exercises that most of us could benefit from. And I've started to do them, and I can feel a difference in my lower back and my overall mobility. And then the last point was number 10, around stress. And maybe as we transition into exploring tuning out to tune in, we could take a mindful minute together, which we've done before. And maybe this has been something that you've done since, or maybe not. But what I'm going to do is set my timer for 1 minute. I'll let you know when to start and when we finish. And bring your awareness to your upper chest or where you sense your breath is. And I'd like you to count how many breath cycles you're taking at the moment. An inhale and an exhale is one breath cycle. So starting in 3, 2, 1, I invite you to bring your awareness to your breath. If you'd like to, you could also soften your gaze, drop your gaze, or perhaps close your eyes if you're comfortable to, and take this opportunity just to go inward. And notice your breath, and if you're wanting to, you can also count how many breath cycles you take. And if your mind has wandered, without criticism or judgment, gently bring it back to the awareness of your breath. And that's a minute. If you're happy to pop into the chat or unmute yourself and share how many breath cycles you took, I'm curious. Ashish, thanks, 12. I think I took about 9. I was trying to count as I was 10. Okay. So the recommendation is 6 to 8 seems to be where I always say single dead digits are great. So if you're getting to 9 or less, and the reason why is the breath is the first place that the stress response seems to trigger, because when we're activated into fight or flight, the adrenal glands will release adrenaline, which then gets the heart to pump a bit faster and our breath becomes more shallow. That's in order to circulate blood and oxygen to the brain to help you focus on what you're going to actually deal with or have to think about getting away from. And so when we're constantly or regularly aware of our breath, that can be one way to avoid getting pulled down the stress spiral. Because when we do, we can have complete what I call lizard hijack wizard moments. I'm sure you've had that experience where you've been so upset or stressed, or a word that a lot of people are using is triggered, or you've been so in such a heightened negative state that you've said something that you regret, or you've done something, or you've wanted to. I mean, the other day I got really angry. I hadn't slept well for 3 or 4 nights, and I couldn't hear a voice note on my phone. And for a second, I actually wanted to throw my phone away. That's not like me. And as I had that sensation, I was like, this is ridiculous. The voice note is just a bit soft, you know. It's that was a bit of a red flag for me. And the breath can help us to avoid getting to those points where we potentially say, do, or think things that aren't constructive. And what's also good about the breath is now, as I invite you to, on your next inhale, if you can, breathe just a centimeter deeper into your belly. So inflate your stomach. We aren't really taught to breathe correctly. And often because of stress, we get very constricted and tight around the upper chest. And so when we start using our full diaphragm and full lung capacity, it can feel a bit strange. But as you breathe in, your stomach should go out. So you should allow yourself to have a bit of a Buddha belly. It's actually very incorrect and harmful to suck in our stomach. So that, you know, we have this idea that we need to have six packs and be slim, but that's not really when we're wanting to achieve balance from stress and feel strong. So anybody who's done any martial arts will know that relaxing your belly is a big part of being grounded and strong. And so breathing a little deeper when you have your next inhale. And on your next exhale, I invite you to give yourself permission to release anything that you no longer want to hold. It could just be a bit of physical tension around your jaw or your neck. It could be an emotion, it could be a thought. The intention that we give to things, or the meaning we give to things, is very important. It's sometimes even more important than the mechanism. So if you believe that you're releasing tension through an out breath, you certainly can do that. And that ties into the message of tuning out to tune in. And the breath can be a lovely anchor for that. So every inhale, we could think about what I need to breathe in order to be focused, to be energized, and what I need to let go of or tune out of in order to be able to tune out correctly at the end of my day, so to speak. So let me go back to slideshow. But I can't emphasize more importantly how much the breath can help. And if you're already doing a lot of breath work, is to consider exploring that more and more, because the research that's coming out is phenomenal. Once we have a properly oxygenated body and mind, we can really help with a lot of healing and optimizing our well-being, so really showing up at our best. And when I did the initial presentation, I touched on this concept, the idea of looking at the seasons as an analogy to help us tune in and tune out of our day, especially spring and autumn. So spring, summer, autumn, winter. Spring is the time of day when you wake up in the morning, you become conscious, and spring ends the moment you engage with the outside world. And potentially you will get triggered into the stress response because you don't know what you're going to see on your phone through Slack or WhatsApps or Telegram or social media or on the telly for news or even the radio. And so the reason why we do this is because when we wake up in the morning, we're in that hypnagogic state. Hopefully we've had a good night's rest. I know at the moment it's not that easy because it's so hot. But that's when we're waking up and our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system feels quite in balance. And the longer we can sustain that balance, or homeostasis is what the term is in terms of our physiology, the more productive we can be, the more energized we can stay, because stress is draining. We know that when we go into the stress response and our heart rate picks up and our breathing becomes far faster and adrenaline goes through our system, we start operating out of a place of survival and not out of a place of thriving. So our cells, especially the immune cells and the hormonal system, there's many systems in the body that go really slow. They slow down when we're pulled into the stress response. Also, when we wake up in the morning, it's important to connect with ourselves first before we potentially get onto everybody else's agendas. And I know this isn't easy, but if we continually suppress or we don't fully know how we're feeling, as I said earlier, what we suppress, the body expresses, and often in a very inelegant kind of way. And the morning, for most of us, this may not be the case for everybody, but for most of us, we have more control over that time than possibly any other time of day. And I really enjoy the poetry by David White. He's one of my favorite poets. He's written some beautiful poems about his own personal experience with burnout and traveling and difficult life transitions. And he's got a lovely piece of writing called What to Remember When Waking. And part of the poem shares these lines. In that first hardly noticed moment in which you wake, there is a small opening into a new day, which closes the moment you begin your plans. So a lot of psychologists and experts in this field and neuroscientists say that when we wake up, it's a really special time and we are highly influenceable physically, mentally, and emotionally. So what we choose to think, to say, to do, to expose ourselves to can have a big impact on us, especially at that time. And when we were together in the first presentation, I mentioned an exercise that could help us tap into our senses, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise. And I'll briefly go through it again in a moment, because our senses, so our sight, our hearing, our ability to taste, our ability to breathe or to smell, brings us into this moment. So if I ask you right now to reach out and touch something, it might be a blade of grass if you're David, or it might be a hard desk if you're me or somebody else. When you're registering that you're touching that, or when you listen to maybe the fan that's going beneath the desk, or you hear the dog barking, you're in the present moment. You're not in the future or the past, which is also a way to stay in flow and to not potentially waste additional energetic, emotional or mental energy. And so there's a mindfulness technique called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 that I use often. But really, the key is to tap into any of your senses. And my recommendation is, could you do this as you wake up in the morning? So when you get up in the morning, maybe it's by an alarm, or you've got kids, or a neighbor, or the birds, or just the heat. Before you engage with your phone or the outside world, or do your first cup of coffee, could you take a moment? And this is where I'm going to ask you to visualize, because I don't know what your home environment is like, but visualize where you will wake up tomorrow morning. I'm making an assumption that that'll be in your bedroom or a bedroom. And as you wake up, there's that time where our eyes might actually still be closed. So we'll tap into the feeling sense first. And could you become aware of how your body feels, how the mattress feels supporting you, how the linen feels against your skin, or perhaps it's really hot in the room already. And then to maybe focus on your hearing, like what can you hear besides maybe the person in the bed next to you, or someone else in the house, or you might have pets. But to focus on what can you hear. And then as you open your eyes, and the first things that you look at is to notice the colors around the room. Most of us, I think, are waking up and the sun is already up because it gets up so early in the morning now. But noticing how and what you see. And if you don't see a lot of things that make you joyful, or hear things that make you joyful, could you bring those into your morning? Like I've got a client who wakes up to her favorite music, Latino music in her case. And we often underestimate the impact of the first things that we see, because what we see and hear and feel will potentially impact our thoughts, which will then impact our emotions. So these are small, quick wins that we could do to help us tune in. And then, in terms of using smell or your nose, is to really, if you can, first thing in the morning, do a mindful minute, or even just take 1 or 2 deep breaths to activate your lungs. And by deep breath, I mean, right now, I invite you to place your hand on your navel or around your belly, your lower stomach. And as you breathe in, intend to push that hand away from you, away from your spine. And then exhale. And then as you breathe in, inflate your stomach and your whole lower capacity, your whole lower torso as much as you can, and push your hand out. And taking a few deep breaths, even just a couple, can activate your lungs and help you potentially to take deeper breaths as you go into your morning. And then in terms of taste, if you aren't doing this already, I'd highly recommend, especially now when it's so warm, but as you wake up, is to have, I don't know, as much water as you can tolerate comfortably, I guess. A pint or 2, just to really hydrate before you then go and maybe grab a cup of coffee. So the senses, we can do this any time of day, like right now, if you tap into your senses by looking away from the screen and noticing what's around you, or listening for sounds, that can be helpful. But specifically in the morning, maybe that'll help you create a little bit of a longer spring. So even if your spring is just 3 minutes, maybe this exercise could make it 4 or 5 minutes. And if you already are in the habit of getting up and doing you first, maybe for half an hour or an hour before you engage with the outside world, by focusing on what you can see and hear and feel, heightens you and helps you potentially to go into the day feeling a lot more like this beautiful quote that you may have read as I was introducing the concept, that the world is full of magical things patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper. Because before we know it, we will move from the season of spring and get pulled into summer, right? Where there's so many things to do and deadlines and all kinds of things. And if you think of your day to day, so before you showed up on this call, how was your breathing? How hydrated were you? Did you have any breaks? Did you have a lunchtime break? Because we know that our brain needs breaks. We've got a lot of evidence now that shows, like this graph illustrates how when the brain doesn't have a break, so this is of a group of people that had back-to-back meetings, you can see the beta brain waves in the brain accumulate over time. So they start to increase and increase, which is why at the end of the day, we can feel tired but very wired and then struggle to switch off. So the way to combat that is to give ourselves little micro charges, small breaks during the day, which helps to avoid that cumulative stress in the brain. And as a basic level, I've shared this, some of these tips is every 20 minutes, so at least 2 times an hour, is to look away from your screen. So look 20 feet away for 20 seconds. That's just a basic break in terms of eye strain. And then every hour, if you can, even if you're not able to leave your desk, but to sit and stand or alternate your posture or to stretch, and to take a bit of a break rather than quickly answering an email or two, that can help us sustain that mental battery that we need in order to work the kind of days and pace that we do. And then I really am hoping that on most days of the week, you are gifting yourself at least a 20-minute lunch break. A lunch break where you don't have any input coming in from screens. It's where you pretend that you're French, you know? You don't have to pretend you're Spanish because the Spanish take a 2-hour break. We're not doing that. But a bit of a recharge so that when you come back for the next 4 or 5 or 6 hours of work, you've actually had a little bit of reprieve and your nervous system isn't just constantly on that high alert. Because more and more, and the more I read about this, the more I practice myself, the clients I work with, when we are most busy and most stressed is when we need to manage our sense of freneticism. And sometimes the most productive thing we can do is, or it's actually not doing nothing, it's giving ourselves a chance to connect with ourselves. So that's when we can go inward. And doing nothing can be maybe the mindful minute. It doesn't have to be a long break or a power nap. It could also be when you're making yourself, say, a cup of tea or coffee, to really be present to your senses as you do that. So the next time you eat or drink something today, I really implore you to, if you remember this, to think about what can you see? What different colors and textures, and what can you feel? What can you hear while you're enjoying that drink? It's because when we pepper our day with the sense of better presence and mindfulness and sensory awareness, our life becomes more colorful and more enriched. And we stop this feeling of Groundhog Day. And that days and weeks merge into one. And then we live for summer. And now we live for weekends. And before we know it, we're going to be living for Christmas. When really we should be living for the moment that we're in. And if we've given ourselves the opportunity to pause during the day, it may make it easier at the end of the day when you need to transition, right? And this is probably the most difficult time, especially if you're passionate, as I know so many of you are as part of the Crebo team, that it's hard to stop when there's so much to do. But we know that if we push through and if we force things, we can end up feeling like the chap there. I don't know, what word would you use to describe how he's feeling? Maybe, you know, frustrated, exhausted, fatigued. Whereas the lady on the right looks, it's also the end of the day. She's stepping outside of her workspace. And that takes courage. So that means having the ability to say no and I've done enough, which isn't easy when there's always something to do. Because what is enough, right? There's always emails to answer and articles to read and proposals to get through and research to be done. But just like my family are from the Champagne region in France, and so I'm sure you're aware that for Champagne to be called Champagne, the grapes have to come from the Champagne region. It's highly regulated. And so the boundaries are very clear. You can't use grapes from Saussignac and then call it Champagne. So what are your boundaries? And this is really only something that you will know. I can't say that for you. And sometimes it helps to think about, well, what do I need more of at the end of the day, and what do I need less of? I sometimes use that when I also speak about champagne, because to make champagne, they have to add in some yeast and sugar, and then when they do the dégorgement, they let go of some of the wine in order to make space to put the cork in. So there's a putting in and a letting go. And whenever we say yes to something, we're inevitably saying no to something else. So for instance, if you say yes to a digital detox an hour before I go to sleep, like I'm not going to be on screen time, you're saying no potentially to heightened stress or the inability to fall asleep. Whereas if you say yes to the digital inputs, you may be saying then no to a good night's sleep. So before we wrap up, I'm going to ask you if there is something in particular that you think you could add in, or is there something that you could take out? And in terms of ideas, in terms of tuning out at the end of our day, because we have to be so vigilant about it, because we don't have the rituals and transitions that we usually do when we're commuting, right? So if everybody was coming to an office and then leaving, we would be saying goodbye, packing up our things, driving home or catching transport, and maybe going past the gym or the grocery store, walking through the front door. There's a lot of very significant milestones that tells your body, your mind, your heart that you are now entering a different part of the day. And that can be difficult when everything's happening around your kitchen counter or your dining room table or your home office. And so having clear, demarcated rituals that can help you to really feel like you've done enough and tune out is important. I don't know if anybody here has experimented with creativity or art, but this quote is really, it's very true. I mean, for children, we know this to be true, that when children struggle to process negative emotions or difficulties or trauma, often through play, they can do that. And we're really big kids, right? So when we're feeling potentially tired or struggling to disconnect, whatever art is for you. So if I think of the senses, art can be visual. So it can be painting and creative work, or I like to build jigsaw puzzles, for instance. I'm not artistic in the sense of painting, but I like to disconnect and look for pieces of a puzzle or a jigsaw to put together. It could also be reading. So recently I noticed that for the last year, I was only reading work-related material. So I ordered myself this box kit of my favorite author, and I've got 10 of his books. And I can feel how I relax a lot faster in the evening if I spend 10 or 15 minutes reading some of that book. Or maybe it's music for you. It could be poetry. It could be doing a new hobby. In fact, it's so important to think about how we learn new things. And I think one of the benefits of what's happened with lockdown is that so much that used to be only available in person is now available online, right? So if you wanted to, I've got a friend who lives in Berlin who is teaching people acro yoga. Do you know what acro yoga is? Acro yoga is where two people will support each other and they pick each other up in different positions, and it's all about strength and balance. And she's teaching people how to do that online. So I guess if you're a couple or you've got a friend or a housemate, or you can learn to do that online. So it's quite incredible times. And then, of course, nature on its own is a very important, I call it a food group, but I think it's a soul group. The more time we can spend in nature, sometimes I don't feel like it and I don't know how it's going to help, but I just go and do it and I feel infinitely better. And we know that it's very soothing for the nervous system. And whatever your expectations are, we know that they're usually not linear, right? So you might have a goal, like, I want to be achieving this, or this is the score I want to have on the calculator, or this is how I'm going to tune in or tune out. But in the reality, you may end up doing it 2 days out of 5, or it's not always going to be easy, and it could be messy. And when we start doing things like mindfulness or increasing awareness of ourselves by asking that question, how am I? How would I like to be? We also allow for emotions to come up, right? And there will be collective trauma around COVID and what has happened. So even if you're feeling strong and confident and calm, know that many of your colleagues are not, and people you care about are not. And so we need to be compassionate with each other and know that it's not always going to be easy. And generally, the only way out through something difficult or painful is through, because suppressing it is not helpful. And this makes me think of there's talking about art, a beautiful art form in Japan called kintsugi. So kintsugi is the art of if a ceramic bowl or vase or ornamental artifact or a glass bowl or vase is broken, rather than discarding the pieces, the art of kintsugi takes the pieces together and then reapplies them with an adhesive that has like a gold lacquer. And the product that's put back together is esteemed of higher value. It's worth more than the original artifact. And the message around that is, despite our brokenness or the messiness of our emotions or our vulnerability, or when things go wrong or we feel like things are falling apart, we can be esteemed of higher value. The key, though, is to have that gold lacquer, that adhesive that pulls the pieces together. So what could your gold moments or your gold adhesive be, for instance? Some of the ideas I've already shared work for me. So nature, exercise. I know that when I start withdrawing, I need to reach out to certain people, and there's certain people that I do that for. But also humor. So thinking, for me, making opportunities for me to laugh can be helpful. And my gratitude practice is a very important part of helping me feel like it's not all that bad. Because even when I think I catastrophize because I'm in that state of fight or flight response, as I was recently, because both my parents I thought had COVID, and you may have heard that South Africa at the moment is not a very safe, calm place. And I was very anxious about what that meant, about me not being able to get to them. And going through my gratitude journal did help me for a few days, where I lost a little bit of perspective, and then I got perspective back again. And I've got a friend who always reminds me, whenever she's feeling like she's potentially falling apart, she will do a random act of kindness. She will go and do something, generally for a stranger, that makes them feel great, but it actually builds her sense of connection. So very important to think through, when those moments come that I feel like I'm falling apart, what have I got to fall back on? And that's where we've got to practice this stuff, because we won't use what we haven't practiced. It's a bit like a professional athlete. If you haven't tried creativity or relaxing to music, you won't have the playlist to go access when you're feeling like you just can't concentrate and you need like 10 minutes to process things. You won't have the breathing techniques if you haven't done that, or you won't use that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise if you haven't practiced it. And then the key is not to have 3 or 4 or 5 things that you try and do, but to pick one. To pick just one thing that you could potentially use, either to tune into your day differently or to tune out of your day. And that one thing, if that becomes something that you're consciously competent at, then that becomes a tool in your resilience toolkit. And if we've allowed ourselves this extra spring in the morning to tune in, and this time for unwinding and disconnecting from work, it's more likely that we can then have the ability to sleep well. It may not always work, but those are the first places to start. Then I would go into, well, let's look at your sleep hygiene and other things like room temperature and that kind of thing. So I'm curious to know, before I share with you, I've got a video that I'd like to end on, and I'd like you to think about, what is your reason why? I'd like you to think about, based on what I've shared, has there been an insight? Is there something that you're curious about? Is there an action that you're committing to taking and putting into practice? And feel free to pop that into the chat or to unmute yourself and share. But has there been an insight, something you've learned, something you're curious about, an action that you may take?
I think one of the takeaways I had from your last session, and I think it strengthened my belief this time around that I shouldn't be checking my phone first thing in the morning because I have a bad habit of checking my Slack messages or anything or the news articles as early as I can. So I think that's one of the takeaway I'll take back, and probably put the phone away for 30 minutes at least after I wake up, and worry about things later.
So thank you. You've just answered my question. I was going to say, how long will you do it for? And then how will you do it? Because it's easy to say, but
Yeah, when I make my coffee, I'll probably try not to take my phone with me, myself. So
well,
at
my
least
phone is on flight mode until 8 a.m. It like, or do not disturb. But I've also noticed that if I get up and I leave it behind and I go do my things, I'm less likely to be tempted.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that probably I should do as well because the
Yeah.
kitchen is downstairs. So I'll come down, not take my phone with me, and enjoy my sip of coffee or tea, whatever I'm having that day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just to from your first session, I really took away the conscious breathing, the taking deep breaths, because when you did that exercise the first time, I think my breathing was 20 breaths in the minute, or
Yeah.
I was one of the worst. So I had got better at doing it, and actually I've lapsed. And it's good that this session you've reminded me
Reminder.
that I do find that really useful, actually, the deep breaths and consciously taking my time and thinking about breathing is that does help open space mentally and thinking of things, and I really do think that has helped me. I need to get back to doing that now.
We all need reminding and nudging. Sometimes it can take, not sometimes, it often takes years for these things to become unconsciously competent for us, So I'd actually rather you keep working on something than move on to something new before something else has become embedded. So that's great. Yeah. Welcome, Emmanuel.
Thank you.
Sure. What I'd like to do is show you a video that illustrates how important it is to have a why. So, Ashish, you need to know why it's important for you to have that half an hour of non-connected time for you. And David, in terms of you taking more deeper conscious breaths. Because when we have a why, those days where it feels like it's just impossible to do things, we'll push through. We'll find a how when we have a why. So this video shows a gentleman who has he starts doing something, and you can see it's not easy. And often when we start doing something new, it takes us out of our comfort zone. Waking up a bit earlier, not carrying our phone with us, or, stopping to have a pause or a midday break. And it's often in that initial phase that most people give up, and then they don't stick to it. So knowing that it's going to be a bit uncomfortable is important, and making it super easy so that you feel good. So maybe Ashish, half an hour is too long for you. Maybe start with 10 minutes. And then when you do 10 minutes, it'll feel good that you've done that. And we change most when we feel good, not bad. That's the psychology behind it. So you'll see here this gentleman really doing something even though it makes him feel uncomfortable. And also, at the end, he has a very, very clear why. There we go. And I know it's not quite Christmas yet, but we're more closer to Christmas than we were on the 20th of June. What did you think or feel about that?
Yeah, it's quite good. Very good.
Yeah, it's
Very moving.
yeah, I've watched it several times, and even now I just spotted another point in it. There's so many, it's a very, very well put together. It's you know, there was a moment where you can see his attitude shifted, right? And he invested money because he bought something new, good gear, and then he wasn't afraid of doing it in the open instead of in the hiding. There's so many lessons around our well-being, but the biggest one there is he started small and he gave himself time, right? He had quite, it looks like months to practice. And even though it wasn't easy, initially he was waking up at like 7:45 in the morning, and then it was 9, then it was 10. And then, but he had reminders as well. I like that he kept the kettlebell on the stoop, you know, on the veranda in the front. That to me is key, is when we're trying to do something new, is to make it obvious, make it easy, and then celebrate the small wins. And that's when we start doing what feels like it is impossible. But then before we know it, we look back and we are doing the impossible because we've taken small micro steps. So that's what I wanted to share with you, because I wanted to finish with a few minutes to spare, so you don't have to, whatever your 4 o'clock is, you don't have to rush into that. But before you go anywhere, I invite you to bring your awareness back to your breath and notice your inhale and your exhale. And if you are comfortable and able to do so, could you breathe a little deeper on your next inhale? So inflate your stomach, breathing right down full into the belly. And as you're breathing in, to ask yourself, what do I need more of at the moment? So now in July, midway through 2021, perhaps with the end of year in mind as a goal, what do I need more of for me? And as you exhale, allow any tension to be released around your shoulders and your jaw. And ask yourself, what do I need to let go of or say no to? What is not going to serve me as I move forward? And even if you don't have all the answers right now, if you anchor your breath and you think about it perhaps later this evening or as you wake up tomorrow morning, our intuition is very powerful. And the subconscious mind speaks to the conscious mind much more when we are relaxed, not stressed. And that's why the morning, as you wake up, is a really beautiful time to stay in that influenceable, curious, deeply harmonized space that you wake up in. And feel free to reach out to me. I think most of you should have my contact details, or David does, because this is an ongoing journey, right? There's no destination. So the more we can help each other, and especially within the team, because you're achieving some amazing things and no doubt more things to come. And I know David does not want you to give up your health while you're building any kind of wealth. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Celine.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah. Just a quick comment from me on, well, firstly, thanks for taking us through that. And also thanks for recording it. We'll make sure that it's distributed around to people who couldn't make it for whatever reason. And yeah, as always, lots of things to think about. And for me, it's some of it's reinforcement of things you've been through before, but there's also a few new things in there as well. So always a good learning experience engaging with you, Celine. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I'll stay on a bit longer if anybody wants to stay and chat or ask quick questions. But those that need to go, remember to breathe as you go.